Well, how y'all doing way out there? I feel like I'm standing out in the middle of center field and y'all are all in the stands. I guess you know that I have expressed before that I'd rather be down there with you than up here. But I do what I'm told to do, and it's better, I'm told, to be up here because of the live streaming, and I want to be live streamed. I'm thankful for the opportunity to share the message that was assigned to me tonight. I appreciate the words that Terry Joe had to say. I really respect him because he said exactly what I told him to say. You don't believe that. You better not believe that. My assignment tonight is to emphasize the importance of remaining faithful to God and active in our faith through the autumn years of life in preparation for our invitation to the marriage feast of the Lamb. And you'll find out why I use that terminology in a little while. But Jesus said in Revelation 19, verses 7 to 9, "Let us be glad and rejoice." Well, it wasn't Jesus that said it. John said it, but he said it about Jesus. "And give him glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his wife has made herself ready. Blessed are those who are called to the marriage supper of the Lamb." I don't know exactly where in our age differences that spring ends and summer begins, and summer ends and fall begins, and fall begins and winter, or fall ends and winter begins. But if we just divided it up into 4 equal parts of 100, first 25 years represents the springtime of our life, the second 25 years, the summertime of our life, the third 25 years, the autumn of our lives, and the last 25 years, if they be so, the winter of our lives. I have lived through the autumn years, and I'm well, by any measure that you might use, I'm well into the winter of my life. And I'm looking forward, not far down the road, to my invitation to the wedding feast of the Lamb. I know the pitfalls of the autumn years. I've been there. The greatest pitfall is what I term the retirement mentality. That's the time when we reach the time that people usually retire, and they start looking forward to what they're going to do in their future life. They want to travel. They want to pursue their hobby. They want to spend time with their grandkids. And none of that's bad, unless we become so engrossed in it that we forget where we're going. And we lose sight of the fact that our goal is to go and be with Jesus and to receive that invitation to his wedding feast. And it's easy during these years of our lives to lose sight of our real goal. It isn't uncommon to hear people reaching that age to say things like, "I've done my part. For the last 50 years, the last 25 years, the last 30 years, I've done my part. Let's turn it over to the younger kids, the younger people. Well, there isn't anything wrong with turning things over to younger people. One of the most encouraging things about this Bible school that I've noticed is the number of teenagers in the class. The teenagers make up the biggest class. Because they're the future of the church. They're in the springtime of their lives. They have their whole lives ahead of them. And God has certain things He needs them to do in their springtime, certain things He needs them to do in their summertime. And I'm talking about the spring and summer of their lives, and in the fall, and hopefully He gives them enough years to live in the winter of their lives. I also know the advantages of the autumn years and of the winter years. For many years, I have heard quoted something that a poet said, "Come and grow old with me, for the best is yet to be." And I thought about that so much that I decided to look it up. Those words were written by Robert Browning when he was 52 years old. He wasn't in the winter of his life yet. And I've been tempted to say many times, and maybe I have said many times, whoever said that hadn't been there yet. And sure enough, he hadn't been there yet. But I don't know if he was talking about the best as the later years of life here on earth, or if he was talking about the best being that which we are aiming for in eternity. What I have thought about a lot that I know is directed toward the good things in eternity is a story I heard about the fellow who laid his grandmother away when she died with a fork in her hand. And everybody who passed by, paying respect to the family and to her, wondered, why is that fork in her hand? And the grandson would say, well, we love to go to Grandma's house because she cooked the best meals that we've ever eaten. But she would start gathering up the dishes after we finished eating and say, keep your fork because the best is yet to come. And that became so memorial of who she was that he wanted everybody to know that not only did she think the best was yet to come when she served a meal, but she lived her life so that because she knew the best was yet to come when she went to be with the Lord. There's two men. Well, first let me tell you about a man that I knew pretty well. He recruited me to go to Africa, who I didn't hear him say this, but I was told that he said when he was 80 years old that the last 10 years of his life had been the most productive of his life. And I wouldn't doubt it. And he asked the Lord to give him 10 more good years, and that they would be even more productive than the last 10 years. The Lord gave him those 10 years plus 2. Dr. Benson was 92 years old when he got his invitation to the wedding feast of the Lamb. But a man that had a lot of influence in my life when I was in the spring of my life was a man named Tony Walton. Now, some of you may remember Wayne Walton, who was a missionary in the Northeast, and I believe the church here helped support him some. Am I right about that? In fact, he visited here not too long ago. Tony Walton was his uncle. His dad and Tony were brothers. Tony Walton was the leader of the little church at Sand Hill in southern Jackson County when I was just a boy. He lived right across the road from the church building. And that church building originally, when I first remember going there, and that was probably when I was 5 or 6 years old, was an old one-room building with a big pot-bellied wood-burning stove in the middle of the floor in the front part of the auditorium. When we had our kids' class, which was called the card class, I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember that or not, we would get back in the far corner and the adults would get in the other corner. Of course, sometimes they would be overcome by us and sometimes we would be overcome by them. But that's all we could do when we had one room. That old building was leaning. First time I remember it was leaning. Well, one winter, Mr. Tony got his farm hands to help him. And somehow they used a big tractor and they straightened that building up. They pulled it back up straight. And I still remember the long brace that went from the corner of the top to the corner of the bottom in the front and the back of that building for several years. Until when I was a teenager, they decided to do some work on that building, and they put new siding on the inside and some new material in the ceiling, and built 3 rooms on the back for classrooms. That was a great improvement. And I remember on Saturdays and sometimes when I got home from school, if I had time, I would go by the church building and help all I could in the work that was going on there. Mr. Tony was the center of it. He was a great Bible teacher, and he was a great song leader. There were about 25 churches in Jackson County when I was growing up, and every one of those churches would hold a gospel meeting sometime in July or August. And those meetings lasted at least 10 days and many times 14 days. And Mr. Tony was recruited by many of those churches to lead singing for their meetings. He would work on the farm all day, quit in time to come in and take a bath and get dressed, and drive to wherever it was they wanted him to go and lead singing. That could go on all summer long, every night. Mr. Tony was known throughout the county and much of the state for his life as a Christian. I knew him from the time I was a child, and I don't remember one bad thing I could say about Tony Walton. I knew him well because he had 4 daughters, 3 sons also, but 4 daughters, and I married one of those daughters. So my father-in-law was a man who, in his late years, still endeavored to do all he could for the Lord. He finally retired from farming at 75. turned it over to the boys. One of the first things he did was make a trip to India. His youngest daughter and her husband were missionaries in Bangalore, India. And they went there. He and his wife went there for probably a month. I don't remember exactly how long, but it was an extended visit. Not just to visit with their daughter, but to hold classes, teach leaders, and try to build up the churches in India. He came back home and he began to think about his friends and his neighbors that he had endeavored to influence for Christ for many years. And he began to wonder, how can I reach them? How can I help them to understand that they need to be living for the Lord? And back in those days, one of the favorite tools of home Bible studies was the Jule Miller film strips. Any of you remember those? Mr. Tony bought the best set of Jule Miller film strips that he could find. And he started having Bible studies with his neighbors. People that he had tried to study with before, but they didn't seem to be too interested, but they were willing to watch a picture show and study. And he baptized some of his neighbors. Later, even after he died, I baptized one of the people that he had studied with. He didn't quit. He was still leading singing and teaching a Bible class at age 90 when his health failed him and he was no longer able to do it. He got his invitation to the wedding feast of the Lord at 92. There's another man that influenced my life greatly, who is an illustration of preparedness in the autumn and winter years of life. Brother James Beckloff. He was an elder in the church in Bentonville when I was working there. And he was also the principal of an elementary school. Even while he was still working as the principal, during the summertime, he would go with me on mission trips. I took numerous mission trips in South America to strengthen churches that had been established through World Bible School, but they didn't have any leadership, and we tried to develop leadership. When Brother Beckloff retired from his work as a principal, India was inviting people from America and other parts of the world to come to, China, to come to China and teach school. Now, they weren't allowed to talk to people about the Bible or God unless they were asked. Then they could answer their questions. But, of course, there were opportunities to teach friends and neighbors and people they knew. And one of the strange things about going to a foreign country is when an American goes to a foreign country, it just kind of draws people. People want to know who an American is. They want to know what he's up to, and they'll listen to what he or she has to say. So when teachers that went to China to teach school were there, they would be asked all kinds of questions about what they believed and why. And Brother Beckloff and Sister Beckloff spent 2 years in China teaching in school. Then he came back and decided to go to Nigeria to assist his brother who had been a long-standing missionary there. His brother had a freak accident and died as a result of the injury. So Jay took over part of the work that he was doing. And he became the principal of a school, a Bible school, that taught preachers. We would call that a preacher training school. I don't know how many 3-month tours he went without his wife to teach a whole term in that school. In addition to that, he started writing books. And he's past 70, into his 80s. He was still writing that book when almost 2 years ago he got his invitation to go to the wedding feast of the Lamb. Now I'm looking forward to receiving my invitation, and I hope that's what you are too. So let's continue to be faithful. Let's continue to be useful. Let's continue to use whatever talents and abilities that we have, regardless of how old we are. Because God has used old people for great things. Did you ever think about how old Moses was when God called him to lead the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage? He was 80 years old. You know how old Caleb was when he said, "Give me this mountain"? He was in his 80s. Old people or elderly people can still be used to accomplish great things for God. The dangers that lay in front of those of us who are older is the dangers of losing the interest that we once had and not remaining as prepared as we should. Jesus used the wedding feast on at least 3 occasions that I can find in the New Testament to teach crucial lessons. One was in Matthew 22, verses 1 to 14, where he used the parable of the king who prepared a wedding feast for his son. He invited all the people that were friends and family to come, and they wouldn't come. So he sent them out and said, "Go find anybody you can. Just bring anybody you can find." And they brought some in. Well, one of the things we'll learn in a few minutes is that Jewish weddings typically, traditionally, provided a certain kind of dress for those who attended a wedding feast, particularly those who were members of the wedding party. And the king came out to examine those who had come to the party, and he noticed one didn't have the wedding garment on. And he taught an important lesson with that. The other's in John chapter 2, where Jesus turned water into wine in Cana of Galilee. It wasn't so much what he taught there as what he did and what that come to mean to his disciples and to his family. The one I have been asked to focus on tonight is the one in Matthew chapter 25, verses 1 to 13. A parable called the parable of the 10 virgins. You know that parable well. But in order to instill it in our minds and grasp the lesson that I want us to get tonight, I want to read it again. Take your Bibles, turn to Matthew 25, and we're going to start with verse 1. Then the kingdom of heaven shall be likened to 10 virgins who took their lamps and went out to meet the bridegroom. Now 5 of them were wise, and 5 were foolish. Those who were foolish took their lamps and took no oil with them. But the wise took oil in their vessels with their lamps. But while the bridegroom was delayed, they all slumbered and slept. And at midnight a cry was heard, "Behold, the bridegroom is coming. Go out to meet him." Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps, and the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered and said, "No, lest there should not be enough for us and you. But go rather to those who sell and buy for yourselves." Who's selling oil at midnight? And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready with him to the wedding, and the door was shut. The door was shut. Afterward, the other virgins came also, saying, "Lord, Lord, open to us." But he answered and said, "Assuredly, I say to you, I do not know you." Now here's the point. Jesus tells what he wants us to learn from this parable. Verse 13. "Watch, therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." Now, if you're watching, that means you're alert, you're ready, you're anticipating something. And that anticipation keeps you awake and alert and watching for whatever it is that you anticipate. Of course, in this case, it's the wedding feast. Well, to grasp this lesson, we should know something about the ancient Jewish marriage customs. It was divided into primarily 3 elements. First was the Shidduchin, then the Erusin, and the Nisuin. Now, I know that means a lot to you, sounds like Greek, but it's not Greek. It's Hebrew. The Shidduchin meant mutual commitment. And this is what takes place when the father arranges with the man who is the father of a young lady, a virgin. He arranges with the father of the virgin to get the virgin as a wife for his son. Traditionally, that's the way it was done in those days. The father would find a wife for his son, then go to the father of that daughter and start making arrangements. Seldom did either of them not want to accept the choice of their fathers. Though they did have the right to object, and sometimes did, but not very often. And so the two fathers get together, and if the father's dead, it's an uncle or it's a son or somebody else that's head of the family. The two get together and they start negotiating the price. It's called a bride price. If this father wants a bride for his son, there's a price to pay. So they start the negotiations, which includes laying aside some money so that she'll be taken care of if something happens to him. It also includes the building or the preparing of a place for them to live. And several other things. Finally, when all the agreements are made, the shidduchim has taken place, and it's time to seal that agreement. And that's called a erusin, or the engagement or betrothal. And once the arrangement has been agreed upon, there will be a signing of the agreement by both parties. Though for the next year or so, they live apart, usually remaining in the homes of their parents. That betrothal is just as binding as if they were married. Now, you might remember in reading Matthew chapter 1, verses 18 to 25, that when Joseph found out Mary was with child and he knew he was not the father of that child, he considered putting her away. Remember that? To get out of a betrothal required a putting away or a divorce just as if they were married. That's how strong the betrothal in the Jewish tradition was. The only way to break that agreement was through putting away. During this time, the groom-to-be was busy preparing a home for his bride. It may be a room on the side of his parents' house, or it may be a separate house, but it wouldn't be very far from the home of his parents. During all this time, his father and his mother are also making preparations because they're going to be the ones who bear the brunt of the cost and the preparation of the feast that traditionally takes place in all weddings. Much of the preparation for that wedding feast and extended celebration had to be made by the father. Therefore, the father was one who decided when his son should go to get his bride. It was usually about a year from the time of the signing of the commitment. And when the father made the decision that it was time for his son, the groom, to go get his bride, then they participated in the nisuin, the marriage or the wedding. Traditionally, Jewish weddings took place in the fall. After the harvest, the weather's cool, pleasant to be outside. The bridegroom, accompanied by his friends, would go to the home of the bride. They would be dressed in brightly colored clothing, as Jesus pointed out in his parable in Matthew chapter 22. But the groom would be dressed the most elaborate, and sometime he would be wearing a crown. The groom was accompanied by another young man that would be comparable to the best man in weddings that take place today. And he would lead the procession from the groom's house to the betrothed bride's house. And when they arrived there, the bridegroom had to be somewhat ready. She didn't know exactly when he would come, but she knew around what time he would come. Upon the bridegroom's procession arriving at the bride's father's house, she would appear also elaborately dressed, usually in white, representing purity and wearing a veil. And she would be placed in a litter and carried in the procession back to the bridegroom's father's house, singing and dancing as they went. Once there, the groom's parents bestowed a blessing upon them, usually drawn from Scripture, followed by prayer. The evening was passed in games and dancing, and the bridegroom took part in the festivities, but the bride withdrew. And her bridesmaids, usually 10, and friends, would go to another room and wait the call that the bridegroom was coming for her. For most of the night, and sometimes into the next day, there was feasting and rejoicing. The whole village turned out as if it were a holiday. Toward the end of the day, there would be a meal in which the men and the women were served separately. The bride, surrounded by her bridesmaids, sat under a canopy while traditional songs were sung and blessings were recited. At some time during these festivities, the groom would arrive, often late in the night of the second day. No wonder the 10 virgins were tired and went to sleep. When the groom and the bride met, they would say something like what is recorded in the Song of Solomon, chapter 1, verses 2 through 4. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth. For your love is better than wine, because of the fragrance of your good ointments. Your name is ointment poured forth. Therefore all virgins love you. Draw me away. And he would respond with something like Song of Solomon, chapter 2, verses 13 and 14. The fig tree puts forth her green leaves and her green figs, and the vines with tender grapes give a good smell. If you have a fig tree, or you've ever had a fig tree, you know that's true. Rise up, my love, my fair one, and come away. O my dove, in the clefts of the rocks, in the secret places of the cliff, let me see your face, let me hear your voice, for your voice is sweet, and your face is lovely. When this dialogue is finished, the men and the women who have been separated all the time of the previous feast will come together for the formal ceremony under the bride's canopy. At some time during the festivities, the following that followed, the bride and the groom would vanish, and the marriage was consummated, but the celebration would continue for several more days. It was at one of these celebrations that Jesus turned water into wine. It was out of that background that Jesus told this story. They knew exactly what was meant because they knew the tradition of the Jewish wedding. But there's something else we need to know in order to get a grasp on the meaning of this parable for us today. That is, we need to know the analogies of the parable. That is, what do each of the characters in the parable represent? Well, the kingdom of heaven is the church. Notably, the bride is not mentioned. Did you notice that? The bridegroom is mentioned. The attendants are mentioned. Because the focus of this parable is not the bride or the bridegroom, but the virgins, the attendants at the wedding ceremony. But elsewhere in the Bible, the bride is referred to as the church. But in this story, the church is represented by the kingdom. The bridegroom represents Christ. The midnight arrival represents the second coming of Christ. Why would he delay his coming? Well, I don't know why the bridegroom in the story or in the traditional festivities would delay his coming, but I know why the bridegroom, Jesus, would delay his coming. It's explained in 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 through 9. There were some who didn't think he would come back because he hadn't come yet. And Peter assured them that he would come. But he said the reason he hasn't come yet, in verse 9, is because he's compassionate and he wants to give time for more people to repent. He's not willing that anyone should perish. So he's delaying his coming. However, when he does come, he'll come as a thief in the night. There are numerous passages that affirm this. Matthew 24:43 and 44, Luke 12:39 and 40, 1 Thessalonians 5:2, and even in Revelation 16 and verse 15. That midnight arrival is representative in our application of the second coming of Christ. The 10 virgins, who do they represent? They're church members. Church members. 5 of them were prepared church members. And 5 of them were unprepared church members. The ones that were prepared were said to be wise. Wise is used often to describe those who are doing the Lord's will. Our young people have been singing about the wise man that built his house upon the rock and the foolish man that built his house upon the sand, Matthew 7. Matthew 24 and verse 45, Jesus says, "Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master made ruler over his household?" Jesus wondered how many would be faithful when he came back again. In 2 Timothy 3 and verse 15, Paul said of Timothy that from a child you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. The wise are those who think ahead, who remain alert, and who are always prepared because they don't know when the bridegroom's coming. The foolish are those careless, lazy, lackadaisical, lukewarm church members who are referred to as fools or foolish. Those words are often used to describe both unbelievers and misguided Christians. Psalm 14, verse 1 says, "The fool has said in his heart, there is no God." Ecclesiastes 2, verse 14 says, "The fool walks in darkness." Verse 4 and 5, "The fool folds his hands and consumes his own flesh." Matthew 7 and verse 26, "Everyone who hears these sayings of mine and does them not will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand." Luke 12, verse 20. To the bigger barn builder, Jesus said, "Fool, this night your soul will be required of you." Romans 1:21. Speaking of those pagans who made and observed false gods, Paul said their foolish hearts were darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools and changed the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man. And then you remember that passage in Galatians chapter 3, verse 1, where Paul reprimanded the Galatians with the words, "O foolish Galatians, who has bewitched you that you should not obey the truth?" There's a startling lesson learned from that. I can't escape that what Jesus is trying to say here is not everybody who thinks they're going to heaven are going to heaven. Not everybody who thinks they're going to receive an invitation to the wedding feast are going to be at the wedding feast. Some will be foolish. Some will be unprepared. They won't be ready. One of the things that Jesus emphasized in his teaching over and over and over and over is that we be ready for his coming. The people that he came to in the first century were not ready for his coming. They had learned about the Messiah from the law and the prophets over and over and over again. They'd learned all the prophecies concerning his coming, his nature, his appearance, his work, all their lives. Yet, when he came, they didn't recognize him. They weren't prepared for the first coming of the Messiah. Are we ready for the second coming of the Messiah? The Old Testament was written to prepare a people for the first coming of the Messiah. The New Testament is written to prepare a people for the second coming of the Messiah. Jesus told this parable and the parables that follow in that same chapter to emphasize the importance of readiness in the judgment day. The foolish or the careless, thoughtless servants who are not ready for the return of the Master. According to 2 Corinthians 5 and verse 1 and verse 10, we will all be judged according to what we have done while living in the physical life. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one may receive the things done in his body according to what he has done, whether good or bad. That midnight cry represents the call to judgment, the same passage I just read. The lack of extra oil of the foolish is the failure to continue adequate preparations. Their failure to think ahead and have extra oil in case the bridegroom tarried, which he often did, and they knew he often did. They weren't making preparation for that. Many Christians won't be making preparation for the coming of the Lord. The extra oil of the wise represents those who continued adequate preparation, who continued in the faith. It's interesting to look through the New Testament and see how many times the word continue is used in application of those who serve the Lord. There's no time when we can retire from the Lord. You may retire from your job. I've retired 3 times. And the Lord won't leave me alone. You can retire from the world, but you can't retire from God. You can't retire from Christ. You can't retire from the church and remain prepared and pleasing to God. Then notice that the refusal of the wise virgins to share their oil with the foolish virgins represents the fact that preparation of one cannot be transferred to the other. You can't get to heaven on the coattails of another person. You can't get to heaven through what another person does, even if it's somebody you know and love and real close. We'll be judged not by what our friends and our neighbors do, but what we do. Here's another important point. When Judgment Day comes, God is not going to judge us by churches. He won't say, well, this Greensboro Road Church was a faithful church, and you remember the faithful church, so come on in. Not going to be judged by the church. You're going to be judged individually, one by one. The word accountable is a good word to apply here. We will be held, we will be held accountable to God for how we have lived our lives. And if at some point in life we decide we're going to retire from God, we may be disappointed at the result. The exclusion of the foolish virgins. They went off to buy oil. They came back. The bridegroom had already gone in with his bride and with his attendants for the final ceremony of the wedding. The foolish virgins come in then and knock on the door. Say, we're back, let us in. Did you notice that he was told, I don't know you, go away. If we give up somewhere along the way, we decide we want to retire from God, when he comes, he won't know us because we won't have the right robes on. We won't be dressed properly because we haven't prepared ourselves for the occasion. And then finally, that closed door. That's why I emphasized it by saying it twice when I read it. That closed door. When God closes a door, nobody opens it. I remember another occasion in the Bible when God shut a door. Do you remember when? When Noah got all the animals in the ark, and he and his wife and his sons and their wives all got on the inside, the Bible says God shut the door. That door stayed closed. Nobody else on the outside ever got in. Nobody on the inside ever got out until the flood was over and the waters had receded and the ark rested on the top of Mount Ararat. So the message to us today, it's amazing. When you're given 20 minutes, you can speak an hour. When you're given an hour, you may finish in 20 minutes. Well, I hadn't finished in 20 minutes, but I'm probably going to finish before this hour's up. Let's consider the message that I want you to get and that I want to get. I've repeated it already. Some Christians won't make it. Some Christians won't make it. And Jesus in this parable is emphasizing the fact that the Christians that are not prepared, that don't remain prepared, that don't remain watchful, are going to be surprised and not ready when He comes again. They might have retired. Secondly, the words of Jesus. Watch, therefore, for you have neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming. Number 3, the greatest 13 words that any believer can ever hear. You know what they are? Well done, good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Matthew 25:21. So what the Lord is saying to us here, no matter how old you get, keep on keeping on. It's better to wear out than rust out. Sometimes people say to me, you're going to have to slow down. You're going to have to stop. You're going to get to the point you can't do anything. Well, okay. But I'm not at that point yet. Don't let anything keep you from continuing to do whatever you possibly can to advance the cause of the Lord and to glorify Him in your own life and in the lives of people you know, your friends, your family, so that you'll remain prepared until you receive that invitation to the wedding feast of the Lamb. Thank you for your attention.